The third government shutdown officially began just after midnight, and this comes after we saw Democrats and Republicans spend recent weeks going back and forth over President Trump's immigration crackdown. Just one area of government has been left without federal funding as of midnight, and that is the Department of Homeland Security. Congress has completed roughly 97% of its yearly government spending responsibilities, but a deal on DHS has been difficult after Democrats walked away from an initial bipartisan plan released last month. Now DHS, the third largest cabinet agency, will see key areas of operation limited or paused altogether. Some 90% of DHS workers will continue on the job during the funding lapse, many without pay. And as of yesterday, it does not appear the two parties are any closer to an agreement, despite the Trump White House sending a potential compromise offer on Wednesday night. Democrats rejected bipartisan negotiations over DHS funding last month after federal law enforcement agents killed 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis during an anti-ICE demonstrations there. They are now demanding significant reforms to rein in ICE and CBP, many of which Republicans in Congress have long panned as non-starters, including banning ICE agents from wearing masks and requiring them to obtain judicial warrants before pursuing suspected illegal immigrants. What happens next? That's up to Senate Democrats in the White House, who are expected to continue negotiating through the weekend and into next week if need be. To discuss further and what this means for you, how you're going to be impacted, I want to bring in Dr. Martin Keifer. He's a professor and chair of High Point University's Department of Political Science. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Well, I want to start with this, and this is just a post here from Speaker Mike Johnson. I want to read it. This just came out about 15 minutes ago on social media. He says, "Here we go again. The new Democrat shutdown, this time of the Department of Homeland Security, will hit some very important programs like FEMA disaster response, TSA security lines, and Coast Guard operations. That means delayed disaster aid, airport chaos, and weakened law enforcement." That's just a portion of that post there. But as we continue to follow this, can you just delve a little bit deeper for our viewers how they're going to be impacted here by all of this?
Yeah, sure. I think your summary was really good in that regard, because we said is like most of government is funded. You've had these deals over the spending bills, and those things will be funded. But DHS is a very important part of security, in national security here in the United States. And so a lot of those folks, as mentioned, are going to continue on the job, even without pay. And so that's one of the ways that things can be impacted. They may be understaffed. People may be tired too, because there was a long government shutdown in the fall, and a lot of those are the same workers, and they're still going to be asked again to give extra, even as they're not being paid in the same way.
Right. And I think a lot of Americans are thinking, here we go again. We've been hearing government shutdown a lot in the political headlines lately. How unusual is it for one department to shut down? And what does that say about the political dynamics we're seeing in the nation's capital right now?
Yeah, it's pretty odd just to have one department, though it's a big one. I think that when DHS was created, it was like 17 different agencies were put together. So it's significant. But, going back to 1980, I think the Federal Trade Commission was shut down, because of lack of funding during the Carter administration. So you can have it happen where one failure to fund or one failure to come to a compromise can end up hamstringing a particular part of government. What does it mean? It means that a lot of the politics of the day have kind of focused on or coalesced around this issue of immigration, particularly immigration enforcement. And so just one set of programs within DHS is the focus now in terms of policy.
Yeah, and again, as you're saying, immigration really the talking point here. I wanted to share this from Hakeem Jeffries. As he said, ICE is out of control. Republican extremists refuse to rein them in. Democrats will hold the line until dramatic change occurs. So that leads us to this question. When is there going to be a compromise? How long can we really expect this all to go on for?
Yeah, it really depends on the parties involved here. That I always would explain to my classes that there's always a mix of how the institutions actually work, right? That you do need people on board in order to pass these particular bills. They've got political reasons for those things. They have policy reasons for those things. So when a compromise becomes acceptable to both sides because of the politics and because of what they think they're getting out of policy, it'll happen. That doesn't seem very specific, but these things move and sometimes move relatively quickly to a resolution. And so we'll see what happens in terms of any concessions that are given to Democrats on what they want, but then also whether Democrats feel pressure to come to some decision, about refunding all of DHS, not just those programs that have to do with immigration enforcement.
And Dr. Kuiper, we do know that lawmakers have left town. We had Senator Ashley Moody on the show just yesterday at the Daytona 500, and she had said to us, she's on call, she's on standby to have to fly back to Washington, D.C. So what should we be looking out for here today, maybe tomorrow on Capitol Hill? What developments could we expect?
Well, look for movement at the leadership level on all of these things, different kinds of releases, different kinds of maneuvers, some sign that there are communications going on to try and resolve it. Ultimately, from the top down, this is going to happen. It's going to be some sort of deal that's made between the houses, the leadership there, but then also President Trump, because Republicans across the country and within the institutions are looking to him for leadership on this, but he also always has that veto pen as just part of his power as president.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question here. When it comes to that, when would President Trump intervene if he is going to make that decision?
Well, to some extent, he's always there. That, anything that the president says in the way that he communicates to supporters, but then also, people with whom there'll ultimately have to be a compromise or deal, it matters. But institutionally speaking, where his power comes from is that pen, right? As he says, look, if the houses of Congress come to some deal that they can agree on, and I don't like it, then it stops right there. And so that's always an important thing to remember as these things go forward, that any end of it is going to have to involve all the parties who have that institutional power.
Yeah, and I just wanted to share this post here again from Representative Jeffries, because as we've been saying here, immigration is such a huge talking point when it comes to this. From a political standpoint, what are Democrats hoping to achieve by tying DHS funding to reforms to ICE and CBP? Maybe those big talking points that we've been hearing from the Democrats.
Sure. I think that you can see in any expression from Democrats in the leadership or sort of in the rank and file that at once they're trying to show their strongest supporters and people who feel most passionately about the immigration issue from their side that they're trying to get something that they want. But at the same time, they're looking at the politics of it more broadly and maybe focusing on some issues that they think have broader appeal. So it's not just always about the strongest supporters. You're also trying to find things that people believe in, outside of the people who show up for you every day.
Yeah, and of course, throughout the past months here, we have seen these protests, people frustrated there in Minneapolis. We've seen several of them. We bring them to our viewers live here on LiveNOW from Fox. Do you see the shutdown itself as a strategic tool for Democrats to leverage some public frustration with immigration enforcement?
I think that's part of it. As I was saying before, that there's always something about policy and there's always something, about politics involved when people are trying to get to a conclusion on funding issues or what have you. In this case, for sure, there are some cases. It is a tragedy when civilians or law enforcement are killed in circumstances like this. But we have to understand that those become symbols of what law enforcement doesn't want to see, and then also, what the rank and file don't want to see. Can you still hear me?
We can still hear you, yes. Your video has frozen, so what we're doing is just sharing some posts here on the screen. But we can still hear you, Dr. Kuiper. And I do want to ask you one more question before we let you go here. When it comes to the possible scenarios for resolving this impasse, is there any on the horizon? I know we've touched on this a little bit here, but your final thoughts.
There's always hope in terms of coming to some negotiation on things like this, that, all parties involved have a medium to long-term interest in continuing operations of government, particularly things that have to do with security. They've got very different views of what should happen with the funding, the rules that govern law enforcement. But in the end, the institutions are set up so that you have to come to compromises about how to continue government. And I think that we'll get there. We just don't know exactly how that's going to happen now.
All right, Dr. Martin Kiefer with High Point University, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join us. We do appreciate it, and I wish we could say goodbye to you, but your video is frozen, so we can still hear you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.